Was that something that anyone had in your family had done before, seeing a psychologist?
Not that I know of, yeah. And it might just be my personality type. I tend to be more introverted than the rest of my family. It's an industry that has extremes where you'll see beautiful things. Families that haven't spoken for years come together and reconcile, or the community come together and not only pay for a funeral, but start a college fund for a young boy who just lost his father. You'll see those things, and then you'll see suicides and murders. And so you have these extreme contrasts that can pull you in different directions, and it's impossible not to be affected. It's learning to acknowledge that it's a difficult job and finding positive and healthy coping mechanisms, which is what I'm still attempting to do.
Can you tell me a bit more about how what you call overexposure to death, how that's affected your faith?
I think in many ways, death is the muse of religion. And so for me, death has called into question a lot of my assumptions.
Has it made you have less faith in a sense of order in the universe?
Yeah, for sure. I'm at a place now where I'm comfortable in silence. I used to want to speak towards death, have words towards death. And what I mean by that is answers, where I wanted some type of framework that makes me feel comfortable with my mortality. And maybe there isn't. Maybe when we talk about death, all there is silence.
You've been going through this as you're working in a family business.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been difficult when you have a very specific faith background that you have shared with your family, and this is leading you to a different place?
Yeah, yes and no. Some of my shifts in beliefs I've kept quiet because I know that they would upset members of my family, but at the same time, it hasn't been difficult because this is something that I feel if I didn't address the questions and find a way to feel comfortable in the silence, that I wouldn't be able to survive.
You said you've been relatively quiet about how your feelings and beliefs have changed as you're speaking into a microphone.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that?
Well, I doubt that, there's certainly, I'm selective with what my parents hear for the most part. In one sense, I would say that I'm more agnostic than I ever have been. At the same time, I think what often happens in secularization is that we assume that we can exist outside of a tradition. And I don't know that we can do that. I think that tradition, and whether or not we have any affiliated religion, there's deeply held beliefs within our community that make us interconnected. And that is something that I still hold to and is an anchor for me.
Yeah, it's community.
Yeah. So.
When I moved to New York City, I would walk to the grocery store past a funeral home in Brooklyn, and I became obsessed with the idea that if I died in New York City, I have no idea where my body would go. Mm-hmm. Because it was like this question of where's my home now?
Yeah.
That's what you're speaking to, like in the community where you live and serve. There's that sense of connectedness.
Yeah.
And it's valuable.
Yeah. And I'm afraid sometimes in our attempt to assert our independence and our individuality, when we remove ourselves from traditions, we remove ourselves from community, it does make death seem like a larger specter.
Is there a particular death that you worked on? I don't know, do you call them clients?
Yeah.
Or what's the word?
It depends. There was, when I first started after I was licensed, I woke up early in the morning. I turned on my TV because I had heard the sound of helicopters outside of the place we were living at the time. And there's enough of them where I thought, well, this could be something serious. So I went downstairs, I turned on my TV, and sure enough, there was on the screen, a Philadelphia news station had come out to cover a fire, a trailer fire that had happened about a mile away from my house. And at that time, they were reporting that 2 young children and 2 adults had perished in the fire. And my first thought was, this is terrible. And then my second thought was, well, there's a real possibility that we could be the ones who take care of these individuals who had perished. And sure enough, I went to the funeral home, and we had gotten the calls, 2 young children. I believe they were both under the age of 10, and then their grandparents. So the following day, after the coroner had done his autopsies and so forth, I was the one who went to the hospital to pick up the children. And when I got back to the funeral home, I was also the one who was to determine whether or not these children could be viewed. And so I unzipped the body bags, and they were actually both in the same body bag. And that was it was a defining moment internally as well. It did something in me where I began to recognize the part that I play as a funeral director in the grieving and the death process. The family was fighting because the one part of the family was Wiccan, another part of the family was Christian, and they were trying to determine what type of service they would have. And it got to such an intense level that we had to involve the cops. So the day before the funeral, we had the cop there, one of the cops, and we were going over some of the logistics of what would happen if there was a fight. And I collapsed. My heart was racing really intensely, and they took me into the hospital. It ended up just being exhaustion, and I was given orders to stay in bed for a couple days. And the next day, I got up and I put on my suit and I came to the service. Looking back, it was a moment where it wasn't conscious, but I saw a need, and I placed the need of others above my own needs, which at the time was rest. Looking back, I see that as a very pivotal moment in my professional life, where something internal clicked, and it became more about the people that I was serving than my own well-being.
When you came to the service that day, do you remember talking to your father or grandfather when you walked through the door?
I don't. I remember them being surprised that I was there because they knew I had just been in the hospital, and they knew that I wasn't supposed to be there. But I quickly fell into place and did whatever I could do to help the service run smoothly. I don't remember what I said. I just remember them being surprised that I showed up.